Before we begin, I want you guys to know that the conversation you are about to hear is probably one of the most difficult conversations I've ever had or recorded. My guest is Arnold Roth. In August of 2001, his 15-year-old daughter Malki walked into a pizza shop in Jerusalem, and a few moments later, she was murdered in a terrorist attack. This conversation discusses topics of loss, grief, frustration, and the aftermath of tragedy, which many people will find difficult to listen to. But it also tells the story of a father and his unwavering commitment to make sure his daughter is never forgotten and that justice is served. Please listen to this conversation with Arnold Roth. Are you originally from Australia?
Yes, I was born in Australia.
What was it like growing up there?
Pleasant, easy, welcoming. One of the nicest places to grow up.
Yeah, a lot of good people there.
A lot of good people. Also, a particular kind of generation that I was part of, because everybody that I knew was the child of people who came to Australia as post-war refugees, basically Holocaust survivors. And that had some very positive impact and some negative things about it as well. But what it meant was that we had a strong sense of hanging together. And I remember that in the public school that I went to, we had routinely, year after year, more than half, and classes were staggered according to clever kids and not so clever kids. So more than half the class was always Jewish.
Okay. And the reason, were there no Jewish schools at the time, or why were you in public school?
I can't really tell you why I was originally in public school, and in the end I made a request of my parents to let me go to a Jewish school, which I did. Melbourne had, and still has, one of the largest Jewish day schools in the world, Mount Scopus College, but it also has 7 or 8 other schools across the gamut, from Yiddish to Haredi. That's today. It wasn't quite as varied in those days, but it was no issue to send a Jewish child to a government school, and that was by far most of my education.
And when did you, how did you evolve from there and get to Israel?
Oh, a very concrete story.
Okay.
I became religiously observant around the time that I started university, and became increasingly aware of how little I knew and how little I'd learned until I met and fell in love with the late Rabbi Norman Lamb, who came to Australia as a guest lecturer and represented something that I'd never seen before and didn't even know existed. A very literate, very worldly, very religiously observant, very well-educated leader and teacher. So the upshot of my meeting him, which was in the second last year of my studies to become a lawyer, was that he arranged for me to go to Yeshiva University, which I had never heard of until he appeared on the scene. Mm-hmm. And after I finished my law degree, I went straight to Yeshiva University and immersed myself in a world that was somewhat new to me. And in the course of that, I met some nice girls. New York has nice girls, nice Jewish girls.
Sure.
And one of them became pretty interesting to me. And then I had to rush back to Australia because my father became very sick. And I said goodbye, and she said goodbye. But then we stayed in touch via the email of those days, which was called aerograms, air letters. And in the end, after having been asked by her on our very first date, do you ever intend to live in Israel? And that's when I discovered that, yes, I did intend to live in Israel. She agreed to marry me. And but I told her that I needed to go back to Australia and get my law career underway. So she asked me how long, and I said 7 years, like Jacob, Yaakov Avinu.
Yeah.
And after 12 years, I kept my 7-year promise. And we came here as a family. We had 4 children at that stage, and settled here in Israel, here in Jerusalem in 1988.
So she waited for you for 7 years, or you got married first and then you went to Australia? How'd that work?
We got married right away, and I dragged her to Australia, and we started a family there, living in what is without a doubt one of the nicest, most pleasant Jewish communities in the world. Yeah. But also a community which has a tremendous tendency towards picking up and moving to Israel, and not because they're being chased, or they or we are being chased by the police or anti-Semites, although that really has changed. And as you may know, there are very serious problems in Australia in general, certainly in Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
But that was much less our story. We left Melbourne. I had started a law firm with a partner, and we were very successful by our own standards. And it was certainly not a career move. When I left and walked away from the things that I had been helping to build up, it meant starting again here in Israel. And I can't say that it was easy, but thank God it's been a very rewarding time. I'm very happy here.
How does it work? Like, if you're a lawyer and you invested all this time and money and effort into your career, and then you leave, I'm assuming you had an Australian law degree. Were you able to use that in Israel?
No, you're asking a very good question. I had to requalify, but it was not a very big deal, and I was pretty experienced at that stage. So I went through the exams, I requalified, I started working as a lawyer, but then I discovered that being a lawyer here in Israel didn't give me the satisfaction that it gave me in Australia, and I looked for other opportunities. And I should mention, and I'm not going to turn this into the basis of our conversation, but I'll mention it in passing, I developed some real expertise in the world of technology, in software in particular, at a time when very few people knew anything about it. And just before leaving Australia, the last 3 years, together with partners, I set up a business software corporation of Australia. And I went from being a lawyer for other people's software companies to somebody running a software company. And it had a spectacular run. And by the time we left Australia, I had been one of the people in the running of the company. I was the general manager who took the company public on the stock exchange there.
Oh, nice.
Less nice than you might imagine, and less nice than I had hoped, because very shortly after I arrived here in Israel and got a job as in-house counsel
For that company.
for a major Israeli technology company that since then has become a multi-billion-dollar company.
Okay.
I became the in-house counsel. My company, the one in which I still had stock when I arrived here in Israel, ran into very serious problems as a result of a bad guy in the picture. And everything that I worked for over those last 4 or 5 years amounted to nothing. I lost everything. So arriving here in Israel was, in a larger sense, the fulfillment of our dreams, I have to say, and I can say that in my wife's name as well, but also a running through of real challenges. And the challenges have kept coming, and they have not been easy. I have to say, even before we get into a deeper discussion, that we're a happy family. We're blessed in tremendous ways. We have children and grandchildren, and everybody lives here, not only in Israel, but here in the city of Jerusalem, but with serious challenges along the way that we've had to take in our stride and cope with as best we can.
You said that you had 4 children in Australia?
Right.
Any more children after you moved here?
Right, yes. 7 more.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we don't generally talk about the total numbers, but we have Israeli-born children, and almost all of our grandchildren are also born here in Israel. And we're very, I have to say, family-oriented. A large part of the pleasure in life that we share, my wife and I, comes from having children around us.
Yes.
And I'd go further than that and say that, to the envy of many of my friends, we have most of our children living not only in Jerusalem, but actually on the street that we live, and the next street, and very close by, which means that on the Sabbath, Shabbat afternoon in particular, we have grandchildren in our house. And a lot of my friends can't make that statement, and we don't take it for granted.
That sounds really special.
Thank God it really is.
I know that, I know you from essentially what I see you writing on Twitter, or now X. I can't get used to that name. For me, it's always going to be Twitter. But I see that you've been fighting what you're calling an ongoing war. And I wanted to get into that a little bit and understand the story of your daughter, Malki.
Malki was, first of all, the youngest of the children we brought from Australia. She was 2.5 years old when we arrived here. And once we arrived here, she never left Israel. She was popular, sweet, intelligent, musical, affectionate, empathetic. And all of those things became relevant when, when she was 9 years old, the youngest of our children was born. Beautiful, like all of my children, I have to say. Beautiful, but as we quickly discovered, very damaged. Perfect at birth, but by the time she was a year old and in hospital for a relatively trivial illness, the most unimaginable things went wrong in the hospital. And the result was she became profoundly brain damaged and lives with us today. Now, we're talking more than 30 years. She needs care around the clock and has very serious life-affecting issues. And Malki, who was older than her by 9, just embraced the challenge tremendously. I don't think any of us really understood at the time how special this made Malki, but she really was special. And she was my wife's right-hand man under very difficult circumstances. We were in hospital many, many times. And Malki was almost always there with my wife or with my wife and me, and deeply involved with her sister, and really loved her sister. And that's saying something, because her sister has never spoken a word and can't reflect back the wonderful things that a loving sister like Malki is showering her with. So that was who Malki was. Malki had learned some terrific things about how you deal with challenges in life and a profoundly damaged sister, and then translated that into things that she did with her friends at school and in the youth group. She was very active in a youth group that's popular here called Ezra, a group for religious kids. And then in 2001, when she was 15, without us suspecting that anything was going to go wrong, she and her best friend, the girl who lived next door, announced in the first or second week of the summer school vacation, "Mummy, I'm heading into blah, 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 I think in town, and I'll see you later, I love you." Those were the words that my wife remembers hearing.
So she called your wife?
No, she put her head into the bedroom where my wife was, because our child, the youngest one, is so damaged. My wife works through the night with our child, and therefore she sleeps later than many other people do. So Malki walked into the room and said, "Bye-bye, Mummy, I love you." And those were the last words we ever heard from her. She and her best friend, Michal, who lived next door, did several things that day, and then took a break. And the break was, let's go into town and have a pizza. And they were standing at the counter of a pizzeria which doesn't exist here any longer, but belonged to the American chain Sbarro, and was at a strategic location in the center of Jerusalem, the real dead center of the commercial part of Jerusalem, at least in those years, when a young man dressed to look like nobody, you wouldn't notice him, but he was carrying a guitar case on his back. And I can't help thinking, because my daughter Malki was so musical, that had she noticed him at all, she would have felt very comfortable. Malki was a very talented flautist. She played in the Jerusalem Youth Orchestra. And
what instrument did she play?
The recorder and then the flute.
Okay.
She played other instruments as well, but those are the ones that were most prominent. So this young man walked in. Malki, and her friend were standing at the counter, having just placed their order, and he pressed a button on his chest, and the entire pizzeria exploded. Of course, we only knew about it once the news reports went out, but from putting together the pieces with the help of eyewitnesses, I know that it was catastrophic and chaotic. 15 people were dead almost immediately. About 130 others, including people on the street, were injured, sometimes in awful ways. And this was a turning point in the life of Jerusalem. We didn't know that Malki was there or that she'd been killed. We only knew that we couldn't find her, couldn't reach her. And in fact, it was 12 hours after the bomb went off that we became aware that she had been killed, and her body was already in the morgue, and the rest of our life was about to begin, a very different kind of life.
If you don't mind, and maybe you will mind, and that's okay, I'm wondering if you can talk to me about like the feelings that were going through your mind when you realized that you can't locate her? And like, what were you thinking?
The truth is, I was sitting there for hours with my family. I had been at work. I was running a drug company in those years, a drug development company, serious business. And my wife called at about 2:02. The explosion had taken place maybe 1 minute before 2 in the afternoon. And she was on the floor with our youngest doing exercises with her with the TV tuned to CNN. And she was aware, before I was aware, that just a little way down the street from where my office was here in Jerusalem, there'd been a massive explosion. So she called. All she was really able to say, because she was screaming down the phone at me, was, "There's been a pigua," that's the Hebrew word for a terrible terrorist attack, and I can't find the children. And before I could say anything, she hung up. Hours later, maybe 2 hours later, after making a lot of phone calls myself, trying to figure out what had happened and where were the members of my family, got on a bus and went home. And for the next 9 or 10 hours, we were all together in our home, praying or crying or hoping or making phone calls. I was doing deals with God the whole time. I was sitting there saying, if only, I'm not going to spell it all out, but if only this, then that. Would that work? Nothing really helped until 11 o'clock at night. Our next door neighbor, who was then the head of a department at one of the major hospitals here in Jerusalem, not a young man, came up the stairs and said, "Come with me, there's a girl on the operating table at my hospital." And he took me in his car. It was late at night. The pigua, the attack, had happened at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I was almost numb, had no real expectations. We arrived at the hospital, the largest hospital in Jerusalem, and it was a scene of bedlam. It was an awful, awful scene. There were dozens, maybe hundreds of people looking for children or comforting their children or variations on that theme. I stood there as he, my friend, professor, went looking around. He came back and he said, "I can't find it." And somebody noticed, who knew him, walked over to the two of us and said, "Who are you looking for?" And my friend explained, and he said, "Try the room over there. There are 2 girls. One on the left is dead and the other one we're about to operate on." At that point, I want to tell you that my whole life changed. At that point, I realized that whatever I thought was the nature of this situation that I found myself in, it was immeasurably worse. And though neither of those 2 girls were my daughter, somebody else noticed us, a social worker, who must have been working there for hours. And she said, "If you haven't found your child yet, I'm taking you with me now to the name of the pathology lab in the Tel Aviv area." Yeah. And I said, "No, I got to go home. I've got to be with my wife. I'll arrange take my sons, my 2 oldest sons. One son had started the army the day before, and the other had already finished his military service. Those were the 2 oldest children, still are. And they went with the social worker, and about an hour and a half later, we got the phone call that nobody ever wants to get. And they reported that they'd found their sister. And in short order, and I don't even remember much of the detail, and I say that realizing what that means. I mean, there was a certain degree of being disconnected from the reality at that point. We buried Malki. The Sabbath came in. The pigua was on Thursday. We found her on Friday morning. The funeral was late in the afternoon on Friday. This was in the summer. And then we sat down to the comfort and rest of Shabbat, which of course was not very comforting and not very restful, but we were together. Now, what happened after that is a complicated and detailed story that I'm sure no one is interested in. The elements...
I'm very interested if you have the time.
The elements I want to focus on when I say that there's lots of detail, the elements that I mean are the elements of being a family and supporting one another. Lots of people were around us. I can say without exaggeration that during the week of mourning, the 7 days, the Shiva, we had, and I've tried to recreate it in my mind, certainly more than 1,000 people come through. Most of them we didn't know. it was probably influenced by the fact that there were two families to visit, because the two girls were murdered at the same time, and the other family, with whom we have very warm relations and still do, were just in the next building. So people came, they wanted to pay their respects. Some prominent people came, lots of prominent people never did come and never did express their respect, but a lot of ordinary people did, and it was really quite moving, if I can use that word. But at the heart of it was us, the family, and it really was a situation where we felt in the middle of a big crowd, totally isolated.
Why is that?
Because the loss is entirely a personal loss. As shocked as other people can be, as upset as they are, as wanting to share what was at that point a national tragedy. Yeah. It's not a national tragedy at the individual level. And you go home to your children, and kiss your wife, and you put your children to bed, and that isn't what happens to the people who are actually experiencing the loss. I'm being very superficial as I even answer you, because I've had time to reflect on these things and years have gone by. And as you probably are going to take our discussion towards, there's also been an enormous amount of pain and aggravation from dealing with authorities in the years since then. But at that moment, and during that period of the Shiva and then of the Shloshim, the 30 days of mourning, these are the first two stages of mourning in traditional Jewish practice. The halakha, the Jewish law regarding losing a loved one, is highly structured. And I have to say, having gone through it now several times, it has tremendous value. And intrinsically, it does something which is, I can't find it in any other things that happen in my life. That doesn't make it easy. It's not easy at all. But, you know, at some point, as everybody wishes to be the case, our life got back more and more towards a normal life. It hasn't become normal, but it's more and more towards a normal life. We're talking a long time. This was 2001. We're now in 2026. That's quite a number of years. And we've learned lots of things along the way. We've had other challenges along the way, but losing Malki was really a turning point in our lives. And I don't mean that just for me, certainly for my wife and all of our children, of course, in their own individual ways have been affected.
I've heard people say that when someone passes and there's a family sitting Shiva, which is the 7-day mourning period, a lot of times it's almost like a blur. There's so many people coming through, people are offering meals and taking care of pretty much everything that needs to be done in the house so that the family who's mourning can mourn properly. And then it all ends. 7 days are over, everyone disappears, and the family that was mourning is left to deal with these raw feelings and memories and emotions. What was that like? Like all of a sudden it's silent and you have to deal with the new reality.
Exactly. It's almost like I'm reading my own essay, because you're really expressing the things that I've said and written about. It can't be different from what you've said. It can't be. There's no natural way, there's no humane way to deal with period A coming to an end and period B, which is a much longer period, getting underway. It can't be different. And one of the traditional things that I'd never actually seen or even knew about was, and I don't believe it has a halachic basis, but it's certainly a strong minhag, a custom, is that when the 7 days were over, we, accompanied with friends, got up, walked out and went around the block. And there are things that you do in simple ways like that, in which you're really saying, we're hoping for better times, we're hoping for change. We hope to put the tragic part of this behind us, of course, not putting away the memories and not putting away all the feelings of longing, but putting away the bad of what's just happened. And I'm drawn to that. A blur, absolutely. I don't remember almost anything of the funeral. And the funeral there were a lot of people. I'll tell you one thing that I do remember, and I have mentioned it in the past because I want people to understand it. One of the first people I saw at the funeral was a minister in the government of Israel who walked over to me with a smile from ear to ear and said, "I'm sorry for your loss and I'm ready to make a speech." And my reaction was really it was an instantaneous reaction. I didn't ponder what I ought to say, but I simply said, "Don't want you to speak. Thank you for coming. Go stand on the side." It undoubtedly made myself unloved among certain kinds of people, but it was clear to me from the beginning, and unfortunately has been reinforced over and over again in the years since then, that people who are in politics, people who are in government, people who have administrative oversight and responsibility are not the people who are going to help you get through difficult times like this, and sometimes they make it a lot worse. And that's unfortunately been the case to an extent that I think people who are hearing won't expect to know and might even resist, but it really has been like that. I'm not interested in being comforted by people from the government. I'm not interested in getting letters from people who say, we stand with you in your loss. Our condolences are with you. Look, let's get those words out of the way. And I say that with the warning that we get letters like that now all the time. In fact, I'll just touch on why that is and then let you take this at the pace that you feel is appropriate. I have a lot of interaction with the government of the United States today. My wife, as I mentioned, was an American whom I brought to Australia, and then we came to Israel together, and our children all have American citizenship. And that's had certain consequences, which I'm sure we'll come to, but it also means that I get letters all the time from people who have been silent for years, failing to do things that they absolutely are obliged to do by law and by the dimensions of their responsibility in public life. And they start out with, my heart goes out to you, and it doesn't. And I'm not interested in where their heart is. I'm interested in people doing the right thing and letting us live our private problems in the privacy of our fortress. The fortress is our family and our home.
So you mentioned just a minute ago that this politician, who obviously has no self-awareness, shows up with a huge smile, and it's all about them, right? They are ready to make a speech. And I'm sure that was extremely hurtful, and like it just shows you how vain people can be, and the fact that like so many people think that politicians are like everything and people to look up to. Well, there are some very wonderful politicians in the world, but a lot of them are quite the opposite. But this person shows up and says, I'm sorry for your loss, my heart is with you. You said that was the last thing you wanted to hear at the time. What did you want to hear? If somebody is in your position and going through this terrible loss, and someone walks in, what would be the most comforting things that they could say at that time?
It's not good to do what I'm about to do, but I have a very clear answer and always have had, even on that day. The right answer is to say, I'm so sorry I don't have the words. And instead of that, we were comforted by people who are, without a doubt, good people. I'm not talking about politicians. Good people. People who came across Israel to visit us in our home without knowing us, just because of the story. There were most of the victims that they were children, and many of those families were shattered. Yeah. Thank God my family was not shattered. We're a strong family. We support each other. But they came, and some of them wanted to say, I'm sure you're going to see your child soon because the Messiah is going to come very soon. That was much harder for me to deal with than having some jackass politician say, I'm here to make a speech. That wasn't hurtful at all. That was my encounter with people who don't really have too much depth. But when nice people come and say you're going to see your child soon, they mean it. But it's not very comforting. And it's not what I wanted to hear, nor my wife. Even if it's true, that's not the issue. People want to say good things. And whenever people say, well, what can I say? I always give them what I just said to you. I'm sorry, I don't have the words, because that's the way I felt. And to a large extent, I still feel it today.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure that the loss of a child is immeasurable. And I'll be honest with you, I don't have I could never understand what you've gone through, what you're going through. I'm sure it's horrific. But unfortunately, after what happened, you've been thrust into another really painful experience that is ongoing, that has not stopped for the last 25 years. And I would like you to get into that if possible.
Sure. Let me put one piece of information here on the table in front of us, because a lot of what I feel and think is built on the foundation of what I'm about to say. My parents, along with almost everybody's parents in my cohort, my friends in Melbourne, Australia, were Holocaust survivors, meaning they came to Australia bereft of everything. They had no money, they had no parents, they had no family home. I've never seen a photograph, with a single exception, I've never seen a photograph of any relative of mine who did not survive the war. We don't even have photographs. That's not unusual. Growing up in Melbourne, you realize how ordinary that is. And now I know that the whole world is not Melbourne. Now, that also tells me that people often walk around carrying big burdens and they don't want to share them. My parents shared almost nothing. And I know this from friends, they have the same things to say.
Yeah.
I know nothing about what my parents went through in the Holocaust. Today, I know a great deal because the internet provides me with a lot of information. I know that both of my parents were in Auschwitz. Both of my parents were in forced labor camps. Both of my parents lost everybody and everything. And both of them were in the hands of the Nazis right up until being liberated by the Americans, as it happens, and therefore started their lives in the American sector of Germany, which meant Munich after the war. That's the rest of the world. Now I find myself in a situation where some seriously challenging things have happened. What do? Do I go out and beg people for sympathy? Do I try to impress them with how rotten our luck has been? Obviously, I'm saying these things in a kind of dismissive way because I am dismissive. That's not, of course, what a person in the situation wants to do. We didn't know we had a big problem at the time. What we knew was many families were in exactly the same situation as us, had lost children or lost loved ones, and groups organized themselves here in Israel to provide support for what we call terror victims. Coming out of every corner, there were about 75 such organizations, and I kept track of them up until, let's say, 2005, 2006. This was a very tough time here in Israel. Lots of pain, lots of people experiencing loss, and lots of people who wanted to help. And some of them were also people who were more interested in perhaps some of the more material aspects of what it means to run a support organization, but there were lots of good people. Mm-hmm. And then all of that kind of passed. And then in our personal story, the next major milestone is that in 2011, 10 years after the massacre at the restaurant, which is just, as you know, a short walk from where you and I are sitting, the ringleader, the mastermind, the spearhead, the woman who did all the planning, the woman who brought the bomb to the front door of the Sbarro, along with 1,026 other convicted murdering terrorists, were let loose by Israel. That was what we call today the Gilad Shalit deal, because Gilad Shalit was the price. Israel got back Gilad Shalit and handed over some of the worst people who've ever walked the face of the earth, including the woman. This was a woman, a Jordanian woman who was 21 years old when she masterminded the massacre. These people were set free. Yeah. In the case of the particular woman who murdered my daughter and the other 15 children, and there were adults as well, half of them were children though. In the case of that particular woman, the judges they couldn't hold themselves back from saying, this woman is a monster. She should never be allowed to, we recommend to the government, she should never be allowed to walk free in any deal. There should never be a deal where this woman walks free. Yeah. We didn't know about that till a long time afterwards, but the government knew about it. And you and I could sit here and try to hold you into your listening position for the next 3 or 4 days as I tell you all the ins and outs of what it means to see the government or the politicians make a decision that some of the worst people in society sitting in your prisons for life, in this case 16 terms of life imprisonment, just like that, are let free. And that's what happened in the case of our child's murderer. And it also happens, as we now know, to have been the case that many of those people who walked free then were the foundation stones of the terrible massacre of October 7, 2023 here in Israel. We were active, my wife and I, in the run-up to the release of all of those terrorists.
Did somebody notify you? Like, how did you... let's step back for 1 second. I imagine that when the people who... I shouldn't say people. When those who masterminded this horrific attack were caught and eventually brought to justice, I'm assuming you were following that case closely. and then you find out that this woman is going to be put behind bars for the rest of her life and many more lifetimes if she were to live that long. Did that bring any closure to you?
Didn't happen the way you just described it, but it should have. We knew nothing about the arrest. We knew nothing about the trial. We knew nothing about the verdict until we heard about it on the news. In the specific case of her trial, somebody who I don't know, who contacted me then, and I still don't know who he is or who he was, phoned me and said, if you want to get the transcript of the trial of your child's killer, meet me in half an hour. And he specified a location. I went there and he indeed gave me a bundle of papers which provided me with the transcript of the protocol and the judgment.
Is this something that's was this hidden information or just information you didn't know about?
Hidden information.
Meaning that person legally was not supposed to...
To hand it over to me? Of course not.
Are these... I know in the States all this stuff is public. Here, is that different?
Today, it's closer today to the American system than it was then. The situation then was, I had no idea of how catastrophic it was. There's no excuse for it. We heard not a single thing from any government official about this case. A single exception, I'm going to mention who that exception is, from the day of the murder until today.
Until today?
Until today.
25 years later, nobody's...
With the single exception of the person who was in charge of the Ministry of Justice Parole Board. Pardons Board. The Pardons Board, not parole. It would be a shame for me to stretch this out. Nobody is as interested in this as I am, and I appreciate your interest, but I'm going to say it as briefly as I can.
Okay.
It wasn't in 2011, which is when all of these people walked free, but in 2005 that we started to get intimations that there are moves to get this woman, this specific woman, this woman who at 21 years old planted the bomb, brought the human bomb to the front door of the restaurant. We heard that she's going to walk free.
How is it possible that you heard that 6 years? Like what? Who was working to get her out, and why would they be doing that?
I can't tell you. I don't know. These are not good answers that I'm giving you. Your questions are excellent. I don't know who was working on her behalf, but they were certainly working on her behalf. And film crews were invited into the Israeli prison to record her and make a story about her. And there were movies about her. All of them, whether deliberately or not deliberately, turning her into a hero.
Resistance fighter.
It's much worse than that, but let's call it that. That's the coat hanger on which we'll hang this particular aspect of the story. So people were trying to get her free, and she was openly being discussed as somebody that the government of Israel was going to have to hand over if it wanted to have peace with whoever wants to have her walk free.
Do you think this is because she's a woman?
No, I think that's certainly part of it. It's atypical. She was the first woman in the service of Hamas, the first female terrorist in Hamas. And she is still today, by far, the most important terrorist in Hamas. The most important terrorist in Hamas today. But the effect on us at that time was, if they're talking about this, and we now know that the judges actually handed down a recommendation to the government of Israel never to let her, how can this be? And here my wife becomes the central player, because she wrote each time, and this happened again and again, to the Ministry of Justice, saying, we heard on the news, we saw in the newspaper, somebody told me on the street. It was always the same story. They're going to release Ahlam Tamimi. That's the woman's name. How can that be? And each time a response came, that's not true. Have no fear. In October of 2011, I got a phone call on my way to morning prayers a day after the Prime Minister of Israel, who was then the Prime Minister of Israel today, the same person, his name is Netanyahu, called me to say, my name is, whatever her name is, it's a woman. I'm the head of the Pardons Board, and I'm unfortunately under the obligation to tell you, we're not telling anybody else, but we know that you've been asking us all these years that the woman who you didn't want to see go free is on the list, and she's going to walk free. Okay, I felt terrible about it. I'm going to argue with her. I could see that the system was making fools of some of the other people who had lost loved ones in Sbarro. and gave them the impression that if they come and appear before one of the superior courts in this country, that they'll get a serious hearing. It was clear to my wife and me that that was not going to happen. We wanted no part of it because we knew that these people were going to be humiliated, and indeed they were. In my eyes, they were certainly humiliated. They made fools of. No one was interested in hearing any of the complaints of children who had lost their families. There was a particular family, a Dutch family, Scheiderschude, 5 members of the family, the mother, the father, and 3 children, leaving, I think, 3 or 4 other children. And they were the ones who were the front end of the opposition. The opposition was, in my opinion, laughed at. There was no serious discussion here, and we kept away from all of that.
It seems in hindsight probably have been a very wise decision, because if the whole thing was essentially rigged from the beginning and there was no chance of your opposition being heard, then why go through the anguish of having to show up there and fight for it if it's not?
I'm more vicious than you are. The way I see it is that if they create the opportunity for innocent people to come along and do their job and appeal to the judges, and the judges give serious consideration to it and then say, no, we have to stick with the government's decision, then we have achieved everything that we needed to achieve. We've satisfied our obligations. Now you can go away. I'm happy that I wasn't the monkey who was in that story. And I don't mean any disrespect to the other family, that's for sure. I certainly mean disrespect to the people who engineered all of this.
Yeah, but I wanted to ask you, I remember those days in 2011. Personally, I was overjoyed because Gilad Shalit, who we all were praying for and hoping that he'd get out, was finally being released. And that definitely made a huge impact on him and his family and so many other soldiers around the country who obviously want to know and believe that, God forbid, if they are taken or they can't come home, the state of Israel will do everything in their power to bring them home. But there is a cost, very high cost that comes with that, and that's what you're dealing with. But would you, how much time would they give you to appeal or fight this decision? Because my understanding was this happened very quickly.
2 days.
So within 2 days from the announcement until the release, that's when you're supposed to show up and make your argument?
Correct. I'll take it a step further. There was no discussion during the period of the Shalit deal, where many people expressed precisely the kind of viewpoint that you've just done so well. No discussion about the cost. It was clear that there was a cost. My wife and I sought out the media and were interviewed only once by the Israeli media, as it happened to Haaretz, and dozens and dozens of times by foreign media. And our message in every case was, this deal is a catastrophe. And now I say, and I said it at the time as well, but I want to say it with a slightly different spin today, if I had been Gilad Shalit's father, I would have done exactly the same. I would have brought the state to a halt. I would have said, it's outrageous, you can't do this, you must get my son back. But the decision had to be made by the Prime Minister, not by the father of the hostage. And no Prime Minister has the moral standing or the right to create, with his own 2 hands, catastrophic outcome in order to achieve a certain benefit. And how do I know that that's true? Because there's a blueprint, there's a manual, there's a book that I call The Dummy's Guide to How You Deal with Terrorists. And that book was written by Bibi Netanyahu and published in 1996. And in that book, Bibi Netanyahu says, you never deal with terrorists, because all you do when you deal with terrorists is you increase their appetite for more. That was the Bibi Netanyahu of 1996. The Bibi Netanyahu of 2011 was a whole different person. And he has never acknowledged that the book that made him a lot of money and created an enormous amount of prominence for him before he became Prime Minister represents the polar opposite of what he did when he was faced with that moral issue for the first time in his career. And I if anyone thinks that I'm angry, I just want to make sure that they don't misunderstand. I'm enraged. I've tried to engage with him, with his office, with people around him. There's never been anything close to an exchange. And I'll say one more thing about this. On the day that my Malki was murdered in 2001, Netanyahu was in Melbourne, Australia, and was interviewed in the wake of the announcement of the terrible terrorist attack that had taken place in faraway Jerusalem. And the way the reporters put it in front of him was, there's an Australian girl that's being killed. Do you have any comments for us? And he said, my heart goes out to the family and I'll be visiting them when I come back. And you can obviously anticipate that what I'm going to say is he never came back to see us, never even tried. But I want you to know that members of his family were members of the same synagogue where my family prayed during all of those years. And he came regularly on the eve of Passover and the eve of Jewish New Year with his entourage of bodyguards. I don't expect him to really care at all about sitting down with us. But that expression, my heart goes out to them, is exactly the same expression that he used in 2011 when he announced the Shalit deal on the eve of Tabernacles, Erev Sukkot. And he said, my heart goes out to those families and I understand the price and I'm going to be writing to all of them. And I'm going to express how I feel. I know dozens of families who lost children during that period. Not a single one of them got that letter. It must be stuck in the mail.
You know what's interesting? It's this recurring theme of, I'm going to express how I feel, or, I'm so sorry if my heart goes out to you, which you've been saying. Wouldn't it be so refreshing if a politician or people who genuinely care would reach out when something like this happens and say, how do you feel? Even if they're not going to change the decision, just to say, we want to hear you. We want you to express your feelings and what you're going through.
Had I known that you were into science fiction, I would have come here better prepared. But that's not reality. That's not going to happen. It's not in any part of my bucket list. I'm not expecting it to happen. In fact, we should move into the direction of what politicians are actually doing today to embitter my life and the lives of other people in my circle. And I'm not saying that because I want to change the direction of the interview, but I'm really saying that's what's on my mind.
Right.
If only, I wanted to say halavai, but some people might not understand the expression. If only there were people who had political power who actually were motivated genuinely by thoughts like this. What do you want to tell us, Mr. Roth?
Yeah.
I haven't met any of them yet.
Let me tell you this. I don't like politics at all. I've been working in and out of the White House over the past year. And it's been in a way a very big letdown, because being in Washington every week has shown me that, I'm not going to say everybody, but a big part of the elected officials, and this probably goes for most of them around the world, are basically just in it to do enough to justify getting elected again. And that's it. It's just this kind of cycle in a game that they keep playing just to stay in power and accomplish just enough to make people happy enough just to vote for you one more time, and then disappoint you again. And it's been like, I'm very thankful to have had that experience and learned this relatively early on in life, to understand that if you want to make a real impact on the world, politics is probably not the way to go. Having said that, I want to ask you a question that you might find uncomfortable, but I feel it's important to ask. You lost your child in the Sbarro Bombing. Mr. Shalit, I forget his name, essentially lost his child for 5 or 6 years when the child was abducted by Hamas terrorists and taken to Gaza. I know that his child getting released, Gilad Shalit getting released, was for him probably the greatest day of his life, and he worked many years to get there. At the same time, there was a cost and a price, a very heavy one, that you and so many other families are paying. You mentioned that, if I was going to be asking you science fiction questions, but I want to know, hypothetically speaking, what do you think should have been done there if you could make the decision? Because, obviously, I know how much your child means to you, and you know how much his child means to him. How do we kind of find a way where everyone can be happy, or is that not possible? There
are major reasons why you can never put the thread through that needle. Let it be clear that I've never expected that my child is going to come back to life. And we're fighting for justice.
Right.
We know who the murderer is. We know what a hero she is. We know how much damage she's doing every single day, and that has continued until this morning. That's not the case with the Shalit family. They wanted their living, breathing son back, and they got him. And I said earlier that if I had been the father in that story, I might have murdered people. I don't know what I would have done. But the decision is not taken by the father of the child. The decision is taken by somebody who's responsible for an entire society, for the consequences of his decisions. And the Prime Minister that I would have looked up to is the Prime Minister who wrote the book in 1996, and not the Prime Minister who said, my heart goes out to the families, but we have to do everything, everything. Everything was a term that was used a great deal during that long, protracted period of the campaign. We must do everything, everything. Had Hamas said, we'll release Shalit if you bring 15 virgins to Kikar Rabin in Tel Aviv and slaughter them tomorrow morning. If you do that, you'll have Shalit back. Would anybody have said yes? Of course not. Everything is bogus. It never meant it. No one intended it. And it's absolutely a worthless concept. So I'm much more comfortable with the idea, much more comfortable. I think it's right, of the Dummy's Guide to Terrorism, the Netanyahu thesis on what you must do. You must never do deals with terrorists. It will always come back and haunt you. It will cause catastrophic outcomes. Yahya Sinwar, the central figure in the catastrophe of October 2023, was released on the same day and the same morning from the same place the path was identical. They both went to Cairo together, and from there he went off to where he went, and she was put on a VIP flight to Jordan, which is where she came from. You always have these outcomes. There's no way to make this work. There is no way to make it work. So you're faced with bad choices. What are you going to do? I wouldn't want to be a prime minister. I wouldn't want to go into politics and have to face issues like this. But that doesn't mean that it's right what he did. What he did was catastrophic.
Right.
It's the only word for it. Catastrophic is a word. If you do a Google search of Arnold Roth and Shalit, you'll see the word catastrophic coming up again and again and again. I'm not trying to present myself as somehow more insightful than other people. It's obvious to me. It's absolutely obvious to me.
Yeah. So now let's get into this ongoing war, as you call it. This woman, Ahlam Tamimi, who you said she drove the terrorists.
No, everyone says she drove. She didn't drive. She came with him on the bus, went through the Kalkilia security check, and then got get into a taxi. She accompanied him because she had picked the site, and she was responsible for the whole massacre. She was given the job of making this massacre happen. She had attempted to do another massacre a week earlier at a building called Hamashpil Tarkhan. Every Jerusalemite knows it.
Yeah.
Big department store. She planted a bomb there. It didn't cause the damage she wanted, and she was enraged. A week later, she got what she wanted.
So she was given 16 life sentences?
Correct.
She was released in the Shalit deal. What happened after she was released? I know that she went to Jordan, and then when did you start fighting this?
Oh, we were fighting it before that, but the real battle began in February of 2012, when it was announced that she's going to get her own TV show made in Amman, Jordan. She was born and bred in Jordan. She is a Jordanian, and she lives there today. The announcement was disturbing because it meant not only that she was getting her life back, because she had been sentenced to a term that you don't survive. 16 terms of life imprisonment is not a happy ending. Having her own TV show, going out throughout the world. This was alarming. The same day that I learned about this, I made arrangements to fly to Washington. Now, here I have to say that I'm not an American, but Malki was, and my wife is, and our other children are. And I became aware, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not that smart of a lawyer, to know how American law views things like acts of terrorism. But I got some help and made some inquiries, and I discovered, to my great surprise, that under American law, a terrorist who carries out an act of terror outside of the United States with American victims using a weapon of mass destruction, it's like almost as if the definition was created in order to fit the Sbarro massacre. I found that. I also found that it had never been applied in a single case. Got on a plane, armed with some information and accompanied by a wonderful lawyer who has been tremendously helpful all these years. We went down to Washington, had a meeting with the top leadership of the Department of Justice and the FBI, got a very good hearing, and I walked away from that with words ringing in my ear saying, if we can get her, we will. I came home and I told my wife, we're in for a rough few weeks because they're not going to tell us anything, but let's hope that they're going to pick up this woman. And well, it didn't work that way. In fact, we didn't hear anything for the next 5 years. Not a word. During those 5 years, I was invited to give testimony to the House Oversight Committee on National Security, which was then chaired by Ron DeSantis. And I got a good hearing. The Department of Justice was there, represented by somebody who was very poorly prepared and made a very bad impression. And I came away thinking, maybe I've achieved something, but I hadn't. And more or less half a year after that, we became aware that, in fact, a judge had signed an arrest order against her back in 2013, just months after I had been in Washington, but it was kept under seal, kept secret. And in 2017, in the first few weeks of the first Trump term, I get a phone call at home from the Department of Justice in Washington. We've got some people coming to meet with you in Jerusalem next week. Can you make some time? And blah, 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 blah. Of course, we made the time, had no idea what they were coming to sit with us for. And the meeting was one of those moments you never forget. A table full of people from DOJ, FBI. We've come to tell you that in 3 hours from now in Washington, we're going to announce the unsealing of criminal charges, very serious criminal charges against Ahlam Tamimi, and an order for her arrest and a request for her to be extradited from Jordan. Jordan has an extradition treaty with the United States. No one said at that meeting, and therefore we're expecting to get our hands on her right away. Quite the opposite. One of the people in the meeting said, this might not be easy, and you're now in the court of public opinion. The message was clear. That person was saying, you've got your work cut out for you now. If you want to see justice, you're going to have to work hard. Not that I felt that they didn't want to see justice, and I have lots of reason to think that they do, but it's a hopelessly political process, and it's still going on until today. This was March 2017. The first disturbing thing that happened was my wife and I drove home together and we talked about it. That was a really interesting meeting. Oh, wait a minute. They didn't mention, and they didn't mention, and they didn't mention. And there were things which just came up and we realized something's wrong here. And then we consulted our friend Google at home and we learned lots of interesting things.
What'd you learn?
Well, first of all, that there was no reward being announced. Everyone else on the FBI most wanted terrorists list, she had been added to it that day, was about to be added to it that day, had a $5 million reward on their heads, and there was none on her head. There's a number of other things. The list is, I can't even remember all the details now, and it'll be boring to run through them. But the point is, there were questions in our minds. So the next morning, I already started calling back the people from the DOJ, and I found no one would take my call. I then found out that the people who provide a reward on the head of terrorists for the United States don't work for the DOJ, they work for the Department of State. And there is a fund there called Rewards for Justice. And there are lots of people for whom multi-million-dollar rewards exist. Sometimes they're tens of thousands of dollars. Mm-hmm. She was really, as I saw it, right at the top of the list. There was no reward. More to the point, the person who ran that office never returned my call until today. And no one wanted to talk to me. That, my friend, was a taste of what's come since then. My wife and I, in our efforts to get justice, are the unwanted guests at the wedding. No one wants to have a discussion with us. Now, it's no longer fair for me to say no one, because there are some people who've spoken to us, but we're still chasing justice today. But along the way, we've had conversations with people where either we see them looking past us, not even listening, or they're emoting and telling us how important this case is, and then they get up and walk out and we don't hear another thing. And I mean not another thing. So this has been a pursuit of justice with lots of challenges. And had somebody written a book or a script that says this is how it works, I would have said it couldn't possibly be. But that's what we've had from 2017 until 2025, between 6 and counting, so it hasn't resolved itself yet. There are no happy endings here. We've had good conversations with a small number of the hundreds of officials and lawmakers and diplomats with whom we've basically forced our way into a conversation. Fewer than the fingers on one hand of people who have actually engaged with us, but none of them has been able to say or has said, we're going to get it, we're going to do this. And let me just add a couple of elements to all of this. Number one, there is a treaty. There's no question that there is a treaty, and Jordan is in violation of that treaty. Number two, Jordan is treated with exquisite deference. People in the United States government at every stage since 2017 have gone out of their way to emphasize the warm relations with moderate King Abdullah and to ignore all of the awful things that are happening in Jordan and emanating from Jordan. This woman is not just another criminal. She is on the FBI most wanted terrorist list. I'll ask you now, and I ask this to be provocative, how many people do you think are FBI most wanted terrorists?
I don't know.
Good, excellent answer. No one really knows unless they've actually looked into it. I've had people say 5,000. The answer is 24. And there are only 2 women there, and the other woman has been there for like 40 years. So she's a very special case. Now, I want to point out that you never see her case discussed in the media. There are opinion articles, usually written by me or by people in my circle. There's no article that runs through the sorts of issues that you and I are discussing now, the years that have gone by, the blah, blah, empty words from public officials and from elected officials and from religious leaders, including Jewish religious leaders and community leaders and organizational leaders, blah, 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 nothing happens. That's an unusual story. Not only that, and I say this with due respect to the world of Jewish leadership. I've been involved in Jewish community politics for a long time. I sat on a committee of the World Jewish Congress all the way back in the early 1970s. I was vice president of the World Union of Jewish Students. Getting a Jewish organization to speak with us, let alone to say, okay, we're going to go out there and help you and lobby for you, is a heartbreaking task. And I don't have the kindness, the generosity of spirit to be able to say, yeah, I really understand these people. I don't understand them at all. I don't understand why this issue is the hottest of hot potatoes. People don't want to touch it. And it's not because they think that this woman has been, framed. Everyone knows she's a monster. She's a savage, a hideous person. She calls it the massacre my operation. Allah was happy with me. You should do it. But it's got to do with Jordan. And what people think they see in Jordan baffles me. I've been to Jordan several times, not since my daughter's murder, but before that, doing business with people highly placed in various circles in Jordanian system. And I know that there are good people there, and there's a lot of hideous people, a lot of very bad things going on.
Yeah.
And yet Jordan, as recently as 3 weeks ago, is singled out by mostly the State Department for really positive, adulatory, admiring attention. Now, Jordan was recently added to a program in which a small number of countries, Switzerland, Germany, Australia, are privileged to allow people from their country to have speedy entry into the United States when they come knocking on the door. They want to be tourists or students, whatever. Jordan is now one of those countries. Something's wrong here. Jordan has a treaty and it tramples the treaty. Jordan is holding America's most wanted female fugitive and it tells the Americans, go take a hike. Of course, none of the words that I'm using are real because no one says, go take a hike. No one talks about it. No one talks about how she's still sitting there. She had her own TV show for 5 years. She has influence of a kind that I could only dream of. And it's all evil.
Yeah.
Her message is the same always. We need to do what Allah wants us to do. She's not interested in occupied territories or green lines or any of the political dimensions of the Arab-Israel conflict, or if you like, the Palestinian-Arab conflict, the Palestinian-Israel conflict. She's interested in dead Jews. And we're calling the person who shields her, who keeps her safe, puts his arm over her shoulder. He doesn't really, but that's the effect of it. We're calling him our moderate friend.
I know that the United States, I don't know how much money it is every year, but they provide billions of dollars.
$1.7 billion is where it stands at the moment, and it's rising. It's been rising every year for the last 20 years.
Yeah, so they're giving $1.7 billion to Jordan every year. You'd think that it shouldn't be a big deal for President Trump to call in a favor and say, listen, King Abdullah, we want to continue giving you this money. We want to have great relationships. We just need you to hand over this woman because she's on our most wanted list and she killed an American citizen and...
Citizens. There are 3 Americans.
3 American citizens. You'd think that it wouldn't be a big deal. I'm sure the United States and Jordan can still have a good relationship if Ahmed Tamimi gets extradited. And it makes me wonder, perhaps you have some answers, why would no one talk about this? Why is nobody returning your call? Why does nobody care? And do you think there's some kind of conspiracy over here? Who's behind this? Why are they not engaging with you?
Jordan has a lot of support in the United States. It pays a lot of money to registered lobbyists. There was a period where every visit to Washington by King Abdullah, who became the king in 1999, would include a meeting with the elite of American Jewish organizational leadership. That's now no longer happening, but it certainly was the case up until 3 or 4 years ago. So it's not only people who are free of any sensitivity to Jewish issues, even those who are the most sensitive to Jewish issues have demonstrated, voting with their feet and with their hands and with their budgets, that they really, really want what's good for King Abdullah and the Jordanians. And for reasons that I can't even offer you a theory about, that means not allowing the Tamimi issue to be discussed. What that means also is not mentioning Malki Roth, my daughter, and the other 2 American victims. I would mention their names, but I know that in both cases their families aren't so comfortable about that. And I simply talk about them as numbers, but they're not numbers, they're lives, they're people. One of them, a young woman who was there with her 2-year-old child, was unconscious for the next 23 years after the bombing, never regained consciousness. Her parents were at her bedside on a daily basis for decades. So there's been a lot of suffering, and there ought to be a strong emotional reaction, and there is, because people don't even know about this, nor do they know just how active and prominent this woman is. I read the Arabic media. I read the Arabic media every day. I can tell you that all over the conventional Arab media, and even more so the social media, she is a living presence. One of the open lies that is being spread by people who represent Jordan has been to say, oh, we've neutralized her. She has no influence. No one knows about her case. Not true. It's an outright lie. Why does anyone who knows this only know it because they're hearing it from me? Why are there no serious journalists who write news? I'm not talking about podcasts, I'm not talking about opinion pieces. Why is there no news reporting about the issues that I barely begun to scratch the surface of in my conversation with you here today? And that is the case. There is no such coverage. This is a case most Americans don't know about. And that includes most Jewish Americans and even most pro-Israel Americans. And even more than that, it's also true of most Israelis. The Israeli media have been utterly uninterested in this. On the Israeli side, and I'm not going to be a psychoanalyst, I think I can give you a good explanation for why this is an issue that people really don't want to get into. But that doesn't affect the American side. And Tamimi, the woman who murdered my child, is only wanted by one country in the world, and that is the United States. And in the United States, where we have lots of robust Jewish organizations with even more robust Jewish leaders, it's a very, very difficult task to get people to even talk about it or to return my phone calls. And again, I hope I'm conveying the sense of, first of all, I am a responsible and serious guy. I have held serious leadership positions at various stages in my career. I'm now a spent force. I'm a man in his mid-70s who's basically interested in taking things easy, and I can't take things easy because this is eating me alive. And it's not missing my daughter. Of course, I miss my daughter terribly. It's justice. And it's American justice. And I don't understand why it's me, child of Holocaust survivors who was raised in Australia, who never had American citizenship and never will, arguing that the Americans should be much more concerned about what's being done to American justice than they are.
It seems like an infuriating thing to have to live with, where every day you know that your child's killer is living the life of a celebrity in Jordan. People look up to her. She does have influence. And you're out here, all you're asking for is the right thing to be done, for justice to be served. And seemingly no one's listening. I'm assuming that you're not even wasting your time with trying to get Australia involved, because I don't know how much influence they have. I'm assuming you don't think they're gonna take that very seriously.
I can't satisfy you on that, because I have made serious efforts, both with the federal government in Canberra and with various parts of the Australian Jewish leadership, to move the Australian government. The argument is that Australia has exquisitely good relations with Jordan, but the price of those good relations is higher than anyone seems to realize. To give just one example, very shortly after Tamimi started her TV career, a school for the Arabic-speaking world's best journalist was created in Jordan, headed by a Jordanian woman who's now a princess, who was an on-camera presenter for CNN. That school is called the Jordan Media Institute. And when it was created, it made quite a big impact, because for the first time, serious journalism and the Arab world could be used in the same sentence, because journalism in the Arab world is not typically that, and in Jordan in particular, there's no free media today in Jordan. No one denies that. Jordan Media Institute. Almost as soon as they got created, their students put up a banner page on a banner poster on every page of their website saying, Ahlam Tamimi is our role model, our success model. That was the expression they used. Ahlam Tamimi, who is a journalist and still is today, is our success model. I went looking to see which countries provide funding for the Jordan Media Institute, and it was a surprising list. One of the countries was Australia, another one was the United States. I did not succeed in getting either Australia or the United States to cut their funding, but I did succeed in getting several other countries to cut their funding. The Jordan Media Institute, until this day, has never engaged with me. They ignored every letter they got, but they quietly took down those signs. They took down the whole student website and told all of the diplomats who had come with complaints to them, it's under control, it's done, don't worry. That kind of sweeping under the rug characterises this battle at every stage. I mention this because you mentioned Australia. I don't have any expectations of the current Australian government. I'm not saying a political thing when I say that, but this is a government that has done shocking things in relation to the aftermath of the Bondi Beach massacre, but also things before it. And they've certainly never shown any interest in pursuing what I thought was a very gentle path of using their good offices with the government of Jordan and saying, this Australian-born American-Israeli girl was murdered and there's a treaty. Could Jordan please look into whether the treaty should be observed instead of being violated as it's being at the moment? One more thing about that. Stop me if I'm getting into too much detail, please. The decision of the Jordanian court say it differently, a Jordanian court, 7 days after the charges against Tamimi were unsealed, back in 2017, held that the treaty between Jordan and the United States is invalid. The treaty had been signed by King Hussein, the father of King Abdullah II, who's the king today, and President William Jefferson Clinton, in 1995. That treaty was 22 years old and fully active and implemented time and again at the time when the Jordanian court held that it's not valid. That in itself is a showstopper, but I took upon myself the task of trying to find out what the Jordanians had said about the treaty at the time that the treaty was signed back in 1995. And here, as a lawyer, I knew something about FOIA. FOIA stands for Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah.
And it's a provision that allows any Joe Blow citizen of the United States to demand, with certain exceptions, that documents be handed over. So I made that request, got ignored. I made it a second time, got ignored. The third time I went to lawyers. They filed not only a request, but then an actual suit. They filed suit against the State Department to get the documents after all these refusals. The surprise here is that we got the documents. We got dramatic documents. The most dramatic of them is a letter in the personal hand of King Hussein saying, I should have explained that the court invalidated the treaty because they say it was never ratified. The letter from King Hussein says, I hereby ratify the treaty and may God protect, and some flowery language. That letter's never been made public. I've tried to make it public. We got that letter under FOIA. I've sent it to journalists. Not interested.
Can you share the letter with me?
Sure.
You've mentioned multiple times that countries say they have very important or very special relationship with Jordan and they don't want to do anything to endanger that relationship. Wouldn't you think that if countries have such a good relationship, then the relationship can survive something that's already been agreed on over 20 years ago?
First of all, yes, you're right, and I agree with you. The way it's usually put to me by people who I think share my views is, don't expect the Jordanians to do this. If they do it, it'll bring down the king. And by bring down the king, they mean they'll bring him the same way that his grandfather was killed. And I say, I think you're underestimating the power of the Jordanian leadership, but I could go further and explain in concrete detail what I think explains that they're wrong. But everybody says it. It's one of these things that everybody knows. You know, everyone knows, no one even asks any questions. I don't even ask that question anymore. I don't ask people, why aren't you bothering the king? I'm asking them, why aren't you standing up for your own laws? Why aren't you standing up for American diplomacy in the Middle East? Do you imagine that the ongoing freedom of Tamimi in Jordan isn't noticed by all the subversives and the murderers and the savages who are just looking for opportunities to create another October 7th, 2023? Everyone sees her freedom as a triumph. Is that, and you made this triumph, is this what you want? So there's no one who's interested in hearing this from me, but I've said it many times in public and in speeches. It just doesn't move people. So apparently there's a really solid sense that not only do we not want to see any harm done to the leadership of Jordan, but we're very comfortable with what the Jordanians are doing. And here's the point where I say, and did you know that the government of Israel announced about 8 weeks ago now, the construction of a multi-billion-dollar barrier along Israel's border with Jordan, the barrier that people keep saying to me, it's peaceful. The Jordanian soldiers are the entire length of the border, and which direction are the guns pointing? At their own people. Doesn't come better than that, Mr. Roth. That kind of line, that kind of everyone knows. You know, what are you pushing us to tell the Jordanians to do something like this? It's going to work against us. What they're really saying, and I'm sorry to put it this way, and this is the only answer that I can really give you, is we really don't care. And really don't care is something that I've absorbed a long time ago. I really care about what's happening. I really care about the murder of my child without in the smallest way imagining that she's going to come back or there's going to be some comfort. That's not what this is about. It really is about alerting people to the consequential dangers that come from demeaning your own system of justice and your own system of diplomacy. And I just don't understand it. I don't understand the Americans. I don't understand the American ambassadors to Jordan, the last two in particular, Yael Lempert and Henry Worcester, and the current one is a story of a slightly different nature, who said at their confirmation hearings, the Tamimi case, top of my list, and then never mentioned it again.
Really?
I've got stronger stories than that, but that's the kind of thing, the kind of attitude, the kind of double talk, the kind of self-damaging rhetoric that has marked this story from the beginning. I don't want anybody to congratulate me, to tell me, oh, you're such a brave guy. It doesn't take bravery. I'm persisting because this is about the murder of a... And this is a case which is very important to me because it's about my daughter. But the principle isn't about a a family's tragedy. No one cares about the family tragedy. No one cares about the family tragedy except the family. It's about something much more important for the whole society, and that is justice, and making sure that everyone believes that you believe in your own system of justice. And if you send the opposite message, what have you done? I don't find a very good response when I use those words.
Do you think President Trump knows about this case?
No. Not for lack of trying. I should also say we've sent letters to members of his family. We've made lots of representations. There are a handful of journalists who've asked questions both in the White House briefing and in the State Department briefing.
They have?
Yeah. And in each case, they've been given disgusting, dismissive, humiliating answers. There's stuff here which only we, my wife and I, the people around us who care, pay any attention to. If it doesn't get reported, no one knows about it. No one knows about the Tamimi case if they don't follow social media. No one knows about what happened in the State Department briefings because no one's interested in hearing about it. Yeah, there are more stories than that. There are some good people in the story, I should tell you, and I'm certainly not going to name names because that would be self-damaging. But there's no one in the story who has said, I know what the next move is going to be. At best, what they're saying is, we're with you, we're doing what we can. But they're very few.
What do you want the next move to be?
The United States to make a public declaration saying Jordan is in violation of the treaty. It's been going on for years. We want her on the 4:30 flight this afternoon. I mean it when I say, at that point I stop. Don't want to be involved in a trial. Don't want to be involved in the media circus which will follow. Want American government to make the clear statement so that every Jordanian and every Arab and every supporter of Islamism, of Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, hears the United States government has had enough. It won't put up with this. Up until now, the exact opposite message. And again, I mentioned earlier that I follow the Arabic media. I read Arabic articles every day. The amount of self-congratulation that's going on in Arabic-speaking circles about how Ahram Tamimi, our revolutionary hero, has fought the Americans into a surrender. This is really dangerous. I mean, dangerous. After so many years, you can't even say it's dangerous. It's created an impossible situation. Jordan is a powder keg. Jordan is majority so-called Palestinian Arabs. One way or another, they're Palestinian Arabs. She's a Jordanian. She's born in Jordan. Her father's business was serving in the Jordanian army. She's as Palestinian as many of the Jews walking around here in Israel. I mean, that's not the best example to give, and yet she is perceived as everybody's hero.
Do you ever sit and think, you know what, like, I've done everything I can, and I've put so much blood, sweat, and tears into this case, and you really have. Do you ever think, you know what, I did my part, and I'm just going to let it go because this is eating me alive every day?
First of all, it's not eating me alive every day, even if I've said those words myself.
You haven't said those words?
I think I have, but not here.
Okay.
I can pick up and walk away from this at any time. I'm not a fanatic. I know why I'm doing it. I'm sure I'm right. And I'm sure that the people who are opposing me are wrong. There is a certain moral righteousness about me that has nothing to do with the United States government. I keep saying I'm not an American, not even about the Australian government. I'm ashamed for what they have and haven't done. But about my friends, Jewish leaders. At the end of the day, the thing that is stuck in my throat is the silence of people whom, at various times, some of them have been my colleagues or certainly friends. And I'll go a step beyond organization leaders and say rabbis, people who are spiritual leaders in Jewish life. I'm a religious Jew, an observant Jew. Being in synagogue is something that is second nature to me. I go every day and my children are the same, and Jewish values mean something to us. It's not rote, not habit. It's inspiration in our lives. And I expected and continue to expect that there would be a view taken of this case that would inspire people to act. Now, it's not that we haven't got responses. We have a petition which has 30,000 signatures. It's still going on. It's a petition addressing the Secretary of State, and it should have 30 million signatures. And I don't mean that as a figure of speech. I mean it, but it doesn't. It has 30,000, and getting 30,000 has involved blood, sweat, and tears. But there are so many other things that could be done. I, at various times, have asked various organizations, give me a platform. You're having a meeting in Jerusalem for all your major supporters, your inner circle. Let me come and speak to them. Sorry, did you say something? It's like completely ignored. It has happened on some rare occasions, but most of the time it's nice to meet you, have a nice life. And I don't have the largeness of spirit or the generosity of outlook to say, yeah, I understand them. I don't understand them. I'm sure they're wrong. And I think that what they're doing has colossal consequences. This is an issue that should have been taken up by leadership and made a headline issue.
Yeah.
And instead, this is an issue where I use the word pathetic. I don't really see myself as pathetic, and certainly not my wife, but a pair of pathetic, bereaved parents fighting for something because they lost their daughter. The truth is that the thing we fight for, in a meaningful sense, more than that, is the charity. We created a charity during the 7 days of mourning, during the Shiva. We decided we're going to create Keren Malki. Keren is the Hebrew word for foundation. And as it happened, the papers were filed and we wanted them ready for the Shloime, for the 30 days. And the 30 days turned out to be 9/11, the 11th of September 2001. On that morning, we received the papers from the office of the Registrar of Associations here in Israel, and we started the work of that organization, which is to embody the spirit of Malki in helping to care for very disabled children. We do wonderful work. That's something that is blood, sweat, and tears for a really good purpose. That's what we do for Malki. This is for justice. What you and I are talking about is getting people to understand that by mismanaging the mission that is on their desks, they're causing, the expression in Hebrew is bichia ledorot. They're going to cause wailing and gnashing of teeth for generations to come. And there's no one to tell them. Now, I'm not the person to tell them, but I'm trying to lead by example and show them that this is a big miscalculation. King, whatever his name is in Jordan, he may be the finest gentleman that there is on the face of the earth, but he's presiding over a system where his country has one of the highest rates of anti-Semitism anywhere in the world, including in the Arab world. Serious problems. They are our major neighbor here in Israel, the entire border.
Yeah.
And Israel now is spending billions in order to fortify that border because it's dangerous. Why didn't they say this at an earlier stage? So there's a lot of things where I feel like I'm a canary in the coal mine. Blah, 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 blah. Tweet, tweet, tweet. Try and get people to pay attention. And I'm not ready to stop. But the thought that you've just described, of course, is on my mind all the time. Maybe I should just stop. No one appreciates it. No one wants it. I'm not doing it for anyone else. But so far, I've decided not to stop. And thankfully, there are small steps, even as recently as the last week, but enormous frustrations.
I know that you spend a lot of time writing about this, talking about this, trying to raise awareness, reaching out to government officials, both in Israel, I'm assuming, and no more Israel.
And there's nothing to talk
It's
about.
out of their league at this point, at least in the United States. You've done everything, or whatever. I think you've done whatever you think you can do, and if there's any avenue that you can explore, you're going to take that. What do you want the people to know? What do you want the people to do about this case?
Good. That's an excellent question. A good way to wind up. First of all, I want people to become familiar with the case, and that's not hard. They can go to thisongoingwar.blogspot.com, which is a blog that my wife and I have been running since 2006, and a lot of writing there about what this case is about. Secondly, they can go to the site of the petition, change.org/extradite Tamimi, and put their names there. You don't need to be an American, and in putting your name on the list, you're doing something concrete that is going to get us a attention when we finally announced the petition. And thirdly, to ask the people in their own circles. It could be the heads of their church, and it could be the heads of their synagogue, and it could be the leaders of the local branch of the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. I want you to hear from me the important message that this is not a partisan political issue. We've been ignored and humiliated by Democrats and by Republicans, and the higher up the tree in terms of the hierarchy of power you go, the more the dismissiveness is noticeable. It shouldn't be that way. So everyone can do something. I don't expect anyone to walk into the State Department and grab Secretary of State Marco Rubio and say, "Why aren't you?" That's not realistic. But give us your names on the petition. Become educated. Talk to people in your own circle. It's a grassroots effort. Do I want it to be a grassroots effort? No, I would have been happy to walk into the Justice Department as I did in 2012 and say, "This is what you must do." I mean, they gave me the answer that they could give me, which is we're going to do everything we can. And here we are years later, and they still haven't done it. But she's charged. She's on the FBI Most Wanted Terrorist list. There's a $5 million prize on her head. All of those didn't...
There is a prize on her head?
Oh, yeah, there always was.
They just didn't announce it?
Sorry. 9 months after the charges, there was a prize. Yeah, but that if you have another 2 hours to spend with me, I'll explain to you what happened there. It doesn't do anybody any credit. Everyone has failed. Everyone has failed. But yes, there's been a prize the entire time, but nobody needs the prize. Everyone knows where she is. She's never been in hiding for a single day. Since she went back to Jordan in October 2011, she has never been in hiding. She doesn't have to be. She has her own TV show. She walks in the street, people cheer her. Jordan, American ally.
There's not much I can say. I want to thank you for, number one, just for coming here to share. I also want to thank you for what I think is a very noble fight that you've been fighting. I know it's not easy, and I think a lot of people in your position would just say, you know what, to heck with it, I've had it, I've paid my dues, and I'm leaving, and I'm just going to enjoy the rest of my life. But you have been fighting this for years, and I think it's an extremely noble thing that you're doing, and I hope that this will raise awareness for people to learn about Malki, about the case, and hopefully by some miracle see a breakthrough and maybe finally see justice.
Allow me to add one more element that we haven't touched on here. One of the things that motivates me personally, and it's not necessarily true of other people in my circle, is that exactly 2 months after the outbreak of the fighting in October 2023, our son-in-law was killed in battle, and he was killed by Hamas forces, leaving two little girls, our grandchildren, who are today 3 and 5. And they're kind of the physical embodiment of the pain that the whole family feels. They lost their Abba, lost their father, because he reacted instantly on the day that the fighting began by saying, "I've got to go and help," and ask my daughter, his wife, if she was opposed, and of course, with her heart in her mouth, she said, "No, I don't oppose. I understand you." And now, here we are, now 2 years later, and we're living with the aftermath. I see the death in battle of Naftali Yonah Gordon, my son-in-law, as the physical expression of the kind of loss that follows when you screw up justice, when you fail to do the things that you ought to do when you can do them, and then leave terrible losses in their wake. As I mentioned, there are other people in my family for whom the death of Naftali has really represented the end of the activism. It's just one pain, one ache, one grief too many. But I prefer to try to take what little positive there is in it and see it as a basis for staying energized. So if there are people who can relate to that, I hope that they'll give us their support. They don't have to do much. We're not asking for money. We want their support. We want them to make themselves familiar with the case, and we want them to help us create a greater awareness of it. If that's the outcome of my sitting with you on this lovely Jerusalem morning, I'll be pleased and happy, and I can only say I very much appreciate the opportunity you've created for me here today. Thank you.
Thank you. By now, you surely know that this conversation was not an easy one, and for me, I know it was really difficult, and I'm sure for Arnold it was way harder. But I very much appreciate him coming on to the podcast to share his story and what he's fighting for. Arnold runs a blog together with his wife. It's called This Ongoing War. You can visit it at thisongoingwar.blogspot.com. I'm also going to put a link in the description of the video and on the screen so that you guys can check it out and go read what he's writing. Of course, if any of you have anything that you can do to bring this story to the attention of your friends, your family, politicians, people in the government, anybody who could help to serve justice, it would be most appreciated by myself and, of course, by the Roth family. And if any of you want to get in touch with Arnold, once again, go to the website. If you guys want to follow the podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, please subscribe. Leave us a review if you enjoyed the episode, if you gained something from the episode. And I hope to be back with you guys next week with something happier. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.